had a good week there. I love them -5.5. And it's not because I think the Jags are good. It's just New England is on kind of a different level of bad from the Jags. And, Jacksonville did what they could to make this as ugly as possible early on. They immediately give up an 11-play touchdown drive on the first drive of the game. Then they punt. Then they give up a 12-play field goal drive to New Orleans. And then Jacksonville rips off 25 unanswered points. So I think it's a reminder that, yes, this Jacksonville team is terrible. They're one of the 5 to 7 worst teams in the NFL. The defense is still a disaster. They still can't score in the red zone. They have trouble finishing off drives. But there is a level of talent here with the Jags that is simply not there with the Patriots. Like, the way I explained it, I think, to Jeff last week was the Patriots aren't expected. What are they, 1-6 now? And the Jaguars are like a disappointing 2-5 because there is so much talent on this team relative to what we see in New England. So I was not surprised that Jacksonville was kind of able to exert its will as this game went along. And really, they had a chance to basically put the Patriots away, like really end this game early in the fourth quarter. Jacksonville went on a 17-play drive that somehow went out on downs, didn't get any points out of that. Again, this is a terrible team in short yardage situations. Like when they get into like 1st and goal at the 7, it's just like a total panic. At one point, Jacksonville ran the ball on 17 consecutive plays.
Michigan style right there. Yeah. I mean, that was the imposition of one's will. No Travis Etienne, so Tank Bigsby takes on the big role there and obviously rewards his investors. 118 on 4.5 yards a carry. Had a couple of scores as well. I guess from the fantasy lens, when it comes to the Jags, Brian Thomas is extremely bankable at this point. I think that's been the case now for some time. But Christian Kirk continues to be kind of a burned pick where you got him. Although if you want a positive spin zone, I did some looking at our fantasy points production this year. He's only 1 point behind Tyreek Hill in total fantasy points this year. He's played one more game than Tyreek, but I don't know if that's any solace.
I don't think it is, because Tyreek Hill was not targeted at all in the first half of that Dolphins game, which I guess it's our obligation to talk about it later. I think, Christian Kirk to me is somebody who could be moved by the deadline. I don't think that would shock me. I think that would make sense for Jacksonville. I think it would make sense for a team like, the Kansas City Chiefs to potentially go out and get somebody like Christian Kirk. And, I think Christian Kirk is like Trevor Lawrence's best friend. So I think that matters perhaps to some degree here. But obviously this Jags season is going nowhere. And it would probably be one of those trades where, like, in your mind, you're like, oh, Christian Kirk, he's pretty good. You should be able to get like a 2nd-round pick. And it'll be like a conditional 6th for Christian Kirk. That's just how NFL trades work. But I do think there's a chance he could be on the way out. Actually was, 3rd among receivers in snaps this week behind Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas. I mean, Thomas is just incredible, man. Had a long catch early in this game. One of those, just kind of rainbow balls from Trevor Lawrence. And, you watch the replay and it's like, I don't know how that was completed. It was really good coverage. Brian Thomas's ball tracking skills, especially on those deep shots, are just incredible. Had the touchdown as well. We talked about that on the betting pod last week. We love Brian Thomas anytime touchdown at +170. So he finishes 5 for 89 on 5 targets. Ended up being a pretty low volume day though overall for the Jags passing game. It was a low volume passing day around the NFL. That was something I wanted to mention off the top. I mean, we only had, John, one game finished with 50 plus combined points this week. We had 7 games that finished with a total north of 50 in week 6. So scoring kind of back down. We only had 4 100-yard receivers, including the Sunday night game. Amon-Ra St. Brown, George Pickens, Keon Coleman, and Breece Hall, of all people, 400-yard receivers for the week. Only one 300-yard passer in Josh Allen, and only one quarterback threw for more than 2 touchdowns, and that was Jordan Love. So kind of a weird week, and we were wondering if scoring would regress a little bit. And obviously, Jacksonville, when you're running the ball 17 times in a row in the second half, it's not going to be a high-volume day. A couple other notes here. Drake May, I thought for the most part looked pretty good. The big question with May was, would he infuse any sort of fantasy value into this receiving core? And the answer is yes. I mean, he goes for 276 yards, 2 touchdowns. A lot of those yards came late. I mean, he was well under 200 yards late in the game. And then, the Patriots are kind of in desperation mode. Hunter Henry, he ended up being the high target man. He had 8 catches for 92 yards on 9 targets. But what's been really tough to figure out is the wide receiver distribution, with this increased volume and increased competency of the Patriots passing game. You're kind of spinning the wheel every single week. Is it going to be Butte? Is it going to be Bourne? Is it going to be Jalen Polk, who was frustrated on Instagram after this game? I mean, Butte led all Patriots receivers in snaps by a lot. He also led them in routes, but he was only targeted twice. No wide receiver was targeted more than 3 times for the Pats.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where this is an offense that it will need to sort itself out as far as the cream rising to the top. Like there is just so much unknown within this group. Like we know who Kendrick Bourne is at this point, obviously, and Pop Douglas was dealing with the illness during the game, so kind of a nothing day from him. But Polk, it's going to take some time. It's not like he was a total finished product getting to the NFL, and Butte, someone who was a legend his freshman year at LSU, and really kind of regressed from there. And I was frankly kind of surprised when he had the touchdown last week in Drake May's first start. So I mean, I think the talent is there, but again, like we're going to take some time for things to kind of settle in as far as this passing game goes. But I think that the big thing is with May being the catalyst. I think in the end that we're going to see some semblance of a competent passing offense from here. It might end up being a little bit frustrating for fantasy. I think the only guy that I'm comfortable starting on a week-to-week basis right now is probably Hunter Henry.
Yeah, I agree. And part of that is just, there's not that many tight ends you feel great about in general. I think the quote unquote drop off from Hunter Henry from guys who have higher name values, just not really there. I mean, Hunter Henry's going into Monday night. He's the tight end 4 on the week behind David Njoku, Jonnu Smith, and Brock Bowers in PPR.
Yep. So it's tough out there as we are all roughly familiar for anyone who invested in the Laportas, the Kincaids, the Kelseys of the world during draft season. Let's get on over to the 1:00 Eastern slate. Let's go to my backyard, Atlanta. The Falcons. It kind of felt like this type of game was coming for Atlanta, where they've been playing well of late, reeling off some wins, but the Seahawks. They're just a team that's going to test you every single time out. Like they have a kind of complete offense. They have an aggressive offense. They have a lot of talent, in the backfield, and obviously with DK Metcalf as well. Suffered what is believed to be a minor knee injury in that one, but hopefully, things will end up shaking out okay. For him, he did leave on a cart, if memory serves. But the Falcons just kind of got beat straight up. It was a bad day for Kirk Cousins. But oddly enough, for fantasy purposes, your usual suspects did, give you a fine enough day. Bijan goes for 100 and a score. London gets 6 grabs for 63 and a score, and Pitts grabs 7 passes on 9 targets. So I mean, the usual suspects of guys that you want from Atlanta were able to kind of give you at least enough.
Yeah, fantasy-wise, you kind of got what you were looking for. Obviously, you see the final score here, 34-14 in favor of Seattle, and it looks like a blowout. It was a blowout, but stats-wise, this was a pretty even game. Really, the only difference was Atlanta committed 3 turnovers and Seattle committed 0 turnovers. And Atlanta had a bunch of penalties in this game as well. But, in terms of like yards per play, total yardage, it was actually pretty equal. Atlanta had more first downs. They were significantly better on 3rd and 4th downs, 10 of 17 combined. And those 2 conversion stats, they also won the time of possession battle. So it wasn't quite as lopsided as you would think. I mean, this was a 24-14 game at one point. And then we have the Kirk Cousins sack fumble that was returned for a touchdown. Then he throws an interception. Then he throws another interception on 3 consecutive drives. So this was what Seattle, it feels like, plays these back and forth games every single week where it's just like, all right, which team's going to stop scoring first, and that team is going to end up losing the game. And it turned out to be Atlanta. I mean, they were kind of going score for score. It was, going from a 1-score game to a 2-score game. Atlanta was kind of hanging in there. And then the 3 consecutive turnovers just completely broke this game open. Younghoe Koo also missed a long field goal earlier in the game. That led to a short touchdown drive for Seattle. You mentioned DK Metcalf. He was having a decent game. And then all of a sudden, we see the shot of him leaving on a cart, but it didn't look that bad. He wasn't really favoring anything. He looked kind of fine riding off on the cart, didn't have like a cast or anything on the knee. The reports are that they believe it's, quote, not too bad. We will find out. For the sake of my NFFC team, I absolutely need that to not be a bad injury. 4 for 99 and a touchdown on 7 targets for DK Metcalf before leaving. You mentioned Bijan Robinson. Heavy day for him. 21 carries for 103 yards and a score. Also had 3 catches for 40 yards. Outsnapped Tyler Algier 50-17. Outcarried him 21-5. We also saw some Jason McClellan, by the way, working into the mix late in this game. Kenneth Walker, who was dealing with an illness coming in, 14 carries for him, 69 yards, had 2 receptions and a touchdown as well. Didn't really look too affected by that illness. Although he was outsnapped by Charbonnet. So once this game got out of hand, they kind of turned things over to Charbonnet for the fourth quarter. Noah Fant had a decent day. Kyle Pitts had a decent day. I think you'll take both of those lines for fantasy purposes. But the one thing I do want to hit on here before we move on, John, is every single week I'm throwing Jackson Smith and Jigba out there in at least one league. And every single week I'm disappointed, man. 6 targets, caught 3 of them for 9 yards. The highlight of his day was a 35-yard completion to DK Metcalf on wide receiver pass.
That was kind of a dime, though. I mean,
it was kind of a dime. I got to give him that. He looked like a natural.
So in your receiver passing stats leagues out there, that's certainly something that changed your week. But beyond that, Smith and Jigba, it's hard to know what to say at this point. I mean, the talent coming into the league, there's so much reason to be excited about him, but there's just, from what we've seen on Sundays thus far, it's very mediocre. I mean, it was catch rate just over 60%, dropping a little bit more than I think people would have thought. The average depth of target is just 7.5 yards downfield. So he's really not someone that is accessing parts of the fields that lead to, much in the way of explosives, anything like that. So he's sort of just this very kind of PPR dependent guy without a lot of touchdown upside and not a lot of yardage upside. So that you're kind of just hoping for empty calories. And that's not what we're trying to draft where you drafted him.
Yeah, he just hasn't been overly efficient either. You look at some of the higher target games for him, save for the New England game in week 2 when he really broke out. There's been a lot of, 7 targets, 3 catches, 9 targets, 5 catches, this week, 6 targets, 3 catches. And, the targets are not necessarily aligning with the number of snaps and the number of routes that he's running. Like Tyler Lockett is still being targeted more on a per route basis. So, part of the reason I love JSN as much as I did was I thought this would be the year that Tyler Lockett would really take a step back, and just hasn't been the case. I mean, he's still just a really good veteran receiver who Geno Smith trusts. So, not much else to say on this game. Seattle moves to 4-3. Atlanta drops to 4-3. Obviously a much needed win here for Seattle, which had lost 3 in a row. They get the Buffalo Bills at home in week 8.
Last thing I will say here is Noah Fant, last 2 weeks, 10 targets, 10 catches, over 60 yards in both of those games. So again, in a landscape where tight end production is hard to find, I think that's notable. I think that, he's someone that if you're into like 12-team leagues and deeper, or definitely 2 tight end leagues, I think Fant needs to be rostered. Let's move on over. We've got Titans-Bills. This one was frustrating early, and then, the Bills kind of ended up taking care of business. No looking. What's Calvin Ridley's catch rate this year?
So we're talking about like catches versus targets, like what percentage
Correct.
is he bringing in? Well, I know he was 0 of 8 last week, and he was like 3 of 9 or 3 of 10 this week. I'm going to say his catch rate is 47%.
You are too generous, my friend. I believe it is a crispy and clean 25%.
Oh my goodness. Oh no.
How does this happen?
Ooh. Well, I mean, I think you got to look at the quarterbacks here, and we have to start by mentioning that it wasn't even Will Levis this week. It was Mason Rudolph who went 25 of 40 in this game. But really weird script. Everybody was on the Bills in Survivor. If you're still alive in Survivor, that obviously ended up coming through. In the Circa contest, I had a long conversation with my pals about, do we want to take Tennessee? It's such a big number, and Tennessee led this game 10-0. With 10 minutes left in the second quarter, and you're thinking, oh man, we really should have taken them. This was such an obvious spot. Well, then the Bills rip off 34 unanswered after 3 straight punts to begin the game. Josh Allen was fantastic once he got it going, 21 of 33, 323 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did not do anything on the ground, however, so you didn't really get any rushing production, no rushing touchdowns out of Josh Allen. Big game for Keon Coleman, 125 yards on just 4 catches, nearly had a long touchdown where he stepped out of bounds. You like to see the 7 targets for him. Amari Cooper was in the mix, 4 for 66 and a touchdown for him. Was only targeted 5 times, only played 19 snaps. So he was targeted on 5 of 12 routes run as they eased him into the mix. And with Cooper out there, we barely saw any Curtis Samuel, and Mac Hollins, was basically a DNP in this game. So not surprising there, but, just kind of trying to assess the trickle down effect now with Amari Cooper in that receiving core. And obviously he'll play a lot more snaps going forward. The Titans averaged 4.3 yards per play in this game. That is very, very poor. The Bills were at 7.2, which is one of the best marks of the season. By the way, I mentioned this on every pod until the record is broken. The Jaguars have the highest yards per play in any single game this season. I think they were at like 7.6 in that Colts game a few weeks ago. But the Titans won the time of possession. They ran more total plays than Buffalo. They were just woefully inefficient. You mentioned Calvin Ridley, 3 catches on 9 targets. DeAndre Hopkins, 1 catch for -2 yards. Those guys are the wide receiver 68 and 72, respectively, in PPR in total points. They have had their bye week, so maybe they're a little bit higher in terms of average value, but still, I mean, do you think DeAndre Hopkins is dealt before the deadline?
Oh, he's someone that I think would carry at this point less trade value than Christian Kirk, like we were talking about earlier. Like if you're looking to upgrade your receiver room, I think Kirk is the clear better option at this point. Hopkins, I thought at times last year showed that he still has it, but this year I'm not sure that he has. And again, like I think it is important to contextualize it. Like this is a broken Titans team. Like it doesn't feel like they made the right hire with their head coach, and the quarterback play has been laughably bad, obviously. So really tough environment for a receiver to do well, but nonetheless, I mean, I think age father time might be catching up with Hopkins just a little bit. So I think as far as those like kind of secondary receiver options that might be moved, I think Kirk would be the better one. Let's see. Beyond that, I mean, I think my big takeaway from Amari Cooper being out there and, kind of getting slow played into this offense, but still making an impact. I think it kind of underscores what a lot of people were saying last week. There's always going to be the comparison, at least for this season, between, how the Bills offense performs post the Cooper trade versus how the Jets offense performs, after adding Devontae Adams. And I think Cooper is such an important piece of that offense that I think he's going to make everyone's jobs easier, because I think as it was beforehand, everyone was a little bit overexposed. Like I think that, these are all ascending, but not finished product as far as talent is concerned, whether it's Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, what have you. But when you have a legitimate, established number one like Cooper, it allows everyone, it takes the pressure off of everyone. So I think that we can expect to see, better numbers across the board for these Bills pass catchers, not named Cooper, moving forward. And I think Cooper's going to get more involved, and I think he's going to have kind of this huge second half.
Yeah, I think so, man. I mean, it's a team that desperately needed a wide receiver one. I know Amari Cooper is not, necessarily a headliner in the way that maybe he would have been a couple of years ago, but he's still, far and away the most accomplished and best receiver in that group. And again, we'll see a lot more of Amari Cooper. He's going to play more than 19 snaps going forward, but encouraging debut for him. Last couple notes on this game: James Cook, of course, was back in the mix at running back for Buffalo. 29 snaps for him. 12 carries. Ray Davis did mix in, played 13 snaps, carried 5 times. We saw a little bit of Ty Johnson, but would imagine that James Cook pulls even more of that snap share once he's healthy. I think maybe they're still being a little bit cautious with him. And then Tajay Spears was inactive. He was injured for Tennessee, and Tony Pollard played 65 out of 73 snaps. I mean, that's about as high as a snap share as you're going to see for any running back with no Spears out there. Carried 16 times, was targeted 6 times. Julius Chestnut was the other Titans back who mixed in. He only played 8 snaps. So very heavy workload day for Tony Pollard. Didn't really return on that in terms of fantasy production. Only caught 2 of 6 targets. So he didn't give you a whole lot there in PPR, and then, under 4 yards per carry on the ground against that good Bills defense.
It was, I think going back to the Bills backfield, it was interesting that Ray Davis, his role gets scaled back, but he still ends up being the Bills' leading rusher, and kind of ends up rewarding anyone who had faith in using him, even with James Cook being back in the lineup. But like you said, I think that James Cook will probably, reestablish himself. But I think that Davis is, showing at this point that he's a guy that needs to get on the field every single week for this Bills backfield. And then Pollard, our DFS optimizer loved Pollard. So I loved Pollard as a result, and they were right on the volume part. It just, the returns just weren't necessarily there. Before we get on over to our next game, we've got a message from our friends over at DraftKings 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick Six, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right. Big thanks to our friends over at DraftKings and their DraftKings Pick 6. Let's keep things moving. Let's go to the Buckeye State, the Battle of the Buckeye State. And, obviously one of the big headlines of this week occurs in this game with Deshaun Watson suffering what appeared to be a Achilles injury that will sideline him. And boy, howdy was there discourse on that. But, if you were on Twitter whatsoever, or if you've watched any NFL TV over the last day or so, you're plenty familiar with that. I don't know how much you want to focus on that specifically, or just kind of move on to what to expect from the Browns here moving forward.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about the Watson stuff. I mean, whatever. There's arguments on both sides. I'm not the biggest fan of like victory lapping an injury, but obviously a unique situation with Watson. So I wasn't going to tweet anything myself, but saw plenty of that. No. They did confirm, by the way, it is a torn Achilles for Watson. You knew it right away. I think we've seen enough of these injuries over the last couple of seasons, especially, that there's really no doubt. But the Browns did confirm that earlier this morning, so he'll be done for the year. Obviously something that could sideline him to begin next year. There are much bigger questions here as far as his future with the Browns, his future in the NFL. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking if like this is the last chance or the last time that we really see Deshaun Watson as a permanent starter. But it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, it's Jameis Winston going forward. It can't be any worse for the Browns. Jameis was technically inactive for this game, but because Watson and DTR both went down with injuries, the NFL has that new rule as of a couple of years ago where you don't have to go to some like wide receiver stepping in to play quarterback. You can kind of like reactivate your inactive third quarterback. So Jameis actually came in and led a touchdown drive at the end of the game. To me, though, so I was on the Bengals in the Circa contest. It ended up winning, but it did not feel good. Cincinnati did not play well in this game at all. I mean, they returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown, and then after that went punt, out on downs, punt, 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 punt to end the first half. I mean, Cincinnati had chance after chance after chance to basically put this game away early. It's like you go up 2 scores in the first half on the Browns, that's basically curtains. And the Cincinnati offense just sputtered and sputtered. They did score on their first drive of the second half. Then they got a pick and went 3 and out on that drive. They took over at the Cleveland 43-yard line and couldn't even work it into reasonable field goal range. So that was kind of the story of the day, I thought, for Cincinnati. They finished at just 4.2 yards per play. Cleveland was actually better on a yards per play basis. Not great, but they were at 4.4. Since he was 2 of 14 converting third and fourth downs in this game. Cleveland finished with more than 100 more total yards than Cincinnati. They ran 24 more plays. They won the time of possession battle by almost a full 10 minutes. But the Browns were also penalized 10 times for 80 yards. I mean, this is a team that really has trouble generating any sort of trunk plays. Already mentioned the quarterback situation. Jameis came in late, led a 12-play touchdown drive in just over 2 minutes. Pretty impressive drive to make that a 1-score game, and they set up an onside kick scenario. Cincinnati obviously able to jump on that. We've only had 1 successful onside kick on the year. In terms of some of the numbers here, T. Higgins out-targeted Jamar Chase for a 4th consecutive game. Chase is still the wide receiver 1 in total PPR points this season, but T. Higgins has been obviously a heavy part of that offense. 8 targets yesterday for Higgins, 6 targets for Jamar Chase. Both those guys found the end zone. We saw the return of Nick Chubb, who got into the end zone, but also rushed 11 times for only 22 yards, played 30 snaps. Pierre Strong led the Browns backfield with 42 snaps. He only carried 3 times, however. And then we saw Deontay Foreman mixing in as well. With Amari Cooper out of this Browns receiving core. Jerry Jeudy played 80 snaps. Jerry Jeudy ran 56 routes. He was targeted only 6 times and brought in only 1 catch. So, if you threw Jerry Jeudy out there in DFS, you took a big L on that one. It was Cedric Tillman who ended up being the guy. 69 snaps for him, 47 routes, 12 targets for Cedric Tillman. And we saw Elijah Moore, kind of slide into that wide receiver 3 role.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, I'd been waiting for the patented Whalen drive summary that we get every week when an offense is really doing bad. It's like, all right, here's how they did: punt, punt, punt. I love that. But beyond that, the Tillman stuff is interesting. I think that a lot of people, just whether it was Watson getting injured or getting benched at some point, again with Cooper getting traded as well, wondered if this offense, this passing offense itself, would get a little bit more appealing if Jameis Winston ended up being the quarterback. And I think that is going to be the case. I mean, David Njoku had a ton of targets yesterday as well. And, in Tillman's case, I am a bit of a believer in his, not to be too much of like a helmet scout, but him and Juwan Jennings are kind of like the same guy. And that's not a bad thing to be, especially, in Jennings's case, that his value is oftentimes tethered to, how healthy the rest of that cast is out in San Francisco. In Tillman's case, like now with all the moving pieces in this offense being gone, I think that Tillman can like step in and be, a solid player. So I'm definitely going to have a lot of waiver wire claims on Cedric Tillman this week. It was good, like you said, to see Nick Chubb get back into the end zone, hit his rightful place. Zach Moss, maybe I'm late to the game on stating this, but Zach Moss has to be droppable, right? At this point.
Yeah, it's feeling that way. 6 carries for 7 yards in this game. I know it's still a decent Browns defense, but yeah, it's turning in the wrong direction for him. Chase Brown outsnapped Zach Moss 31-27. So you look at that and you're like, all right, it's pretty close, but he outcarried him 15-6. And obviously he's the guy they trust more in passing situations as well. So it's still, it's still technically a 2-back system. I don't know that we're ever going to get to the point where, one of these guys is like dramatically outsnapping the other. But despite essentially playing the same number of snaps, Chase Brown either touched the ball, as a ball carrier or was targeted on well over half of his snaps. Whereas Zach Moss, was kind of targeted on about a third of his. So yeah, I would be pretty comfortable dropping Zach Moss at this point. I think if there is a back to own there, it's obviously Chase Brown.
Yep. So that was one of the big, draft season toss-ups. Their ADPs were very close, and therefore there were camps of team Chase Brown, team Zach Moss, and it looks like the Chase Brown guys are pulling ahead right now. Over the last 3 weeks, Zach Moss 21 carries for 44 yards. Not what you want.
No, not what you want. Not much else to say about this game. Cincinnati, good to get to 3-4. It's been they kind of played the same game as they did last week against the Giants. Honestly,
I was going to say, yeah,
break through a couple of times. Get a couple of big plays. Other than that, you're just punting a bunch. Cincy is home for the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 8, so that'll be a very fun game. In Cleveland, they are home for your Baltimore Ravens. So things likely to go from bad to worse for the Browns. And I don't know who they're going to start going forward. Nothing that the Browns do makes sense. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they go to DTR, even though Jameis is like far and away the more capable option. But we haven't received any official word on that quite yet.
Yep. I remember DTR's first start against the Ravens in Cleveland last year. It didn't go well for the Browns.
It hasn't gone well for him on balance in the NFL.
Nope. Just mostly a fun guy at UCLA. Texans, Packers. Really tough day from CJ Stroud.
Yeah, obviously I'm here in Wisconsin. I have a lot of Packers fan friends. I have a lot of overactive group chats during any Packers game. Yeah, this is one that swung back and forth. Obviously, I think we had like 5 or 6 lead changes throughout the game. Green Bay, of course, wins it on a walk-off field goal from their brand new kicker, Brandon McManus, ex-Jaguar, cleared of all charges from whatever happened on that plane with the Jags, but he's back. I think this was one of the better games that I've seen from a Packers defense in the last few years, especially considering that this defense, which leads the NFL in forced turnovers, they had 17 coming into this game, did not force a single turnover. And Jordan Love threw 2 picks. Both of them were bad. Green Bay's special teams were a total mess in this game. They had what'll technically go down as a muff punt But essentially, Keyshawn Nixon was about to catch a punt in a crowd. You got like 5 guys, a couple Packers, a couple Texans around him. And at the last second, he just backs away, and it kind of caromed off of the leg of Karen T. Ballantyne, one of the defensive backs for the Packers. And that's on Nixon. You have to make that catch. It was not a situation where somebody's just not paying attention and the ball's rolling around. It's like he literally let it drop in a crowd. Of course, it's going to hit somebody. So that set the Texans up for a touchdown. They also had a punt return later in the game where like they alternate Jaden Reed and Keyshawn Nixon as punt returners. I have no idea why. I've not been able to get any rationale for this. It was a great punt by the Texans. Jaden Reed is like sprinting backwards and catches it over his shoulder at the 1, and it carries him into the end zone, and then he had to take it out. Ends up being tackled at like the 3-yard line. This was at a point in the game where Green Bay had been stringing together stops. They were up, I believe, 2 at the time. And you put a touchdown on the board on any of those drives, and you make it a 2-score game. And with the way Houston was rolling on offense, which was not well, you kind of felt like that might be enough. So that was like a 30-yard swing in terms of field position. So just a weird, sloppy game for Green Bay. Like I said, both of the picks by Love were not good. Threw one into double coverage. Another one, he just airmailed Christian Watson over the middle of the field. But for Green Bay, I think to rally back and win this game where it felt like nothing was going their way, that showed me a lot, because the Packers have a tough schedule the rest of the way. And, getting to 5-2 here as opposed to 4-3, I think does give them some nice room for error. You still got to play Detroit twice. You got to play Minnesota again. You're not getting the 2 free wins that you normally bank against Chicago anymore. You got to play that team twice. So a really, really nice day for the Green Bay defense, who they got some dudes on that team, man. Like Rashawn Gary had been terrible so far this year. This was easily his best effort of the season. CJ Stroud was being pressured on about half of his dropbacks for the game. That number was even higher through 3 quarters. I think they sacked him 4 times, felt like more. And Green Bay has a real dude, by the way, in their rookie safety, Evan Williams, who is not only the highest graded rookie defensive back at PFF, he's the highest graded safety in football. He had another really nice game this week.
Yeah, I remember tweeting when Evan Williams got drafted that Evan Williams green label is going to be like the most popular thing you see in a Lambeau Field tailgate going forward. Some good cheap firewater there, but beyond that, I think your point stands. This Packers defense is really opportune, making a ton of plays. It's surprising that Evan Williams is doing better than like Javon Bullard, who that was a bigger draft pick, but even still. As a result, like the downstream effects of the Texans being, kind of just put in a cage all afternoon. Tough performances from a fantasy perspective from Stephon Diggs. 5 catches for a whopping 23 yards. Tank Dell, a little goose egg for him, 0 for 4 on his targets. Joe Mixon, though, on a points per game basis, is actually RB2 right now.
Yeah, another big day for Joe Mixon. He was able to capitalize on some of the short fields that Houston had due to the turnovers. I think, 17 of the 22 points on the day for Houston. And part of the reason, by the way, they had a weird final score is they went for 2 and didn't get it. So if you're seeing the 22 and you think what's going on there, that's why. But yeah, Mixon's been incredible, man. I mean, they're a totally different offense when he's out there, and it hasn't seemed to matter who they're facing, what the game script is. Like, he just finds a way to be productive. It was a very run heavy script in general for Houston. Stroud only threw the ball 21 times, 10 of 21 for 86 yards, but Mixon goes 25 for 115 and the 2 touchdowns. Green Bay held Houston to 197 total yards, 3.4 yards per play. One of the lowest yards per play figures by any team this season. It's like the 5th lowest. Houston's previous low in any game was just 4.7. So you can see the gap there in terms of just how inept this offense was relative to their previous worst game of the year. This has been an offense that, has not necessarily been firing on all cylinders, especially without Nico Collins. So heck of a day for the Green Bay defense. You mentioned Tank Dell taking a 0. That's tough. Dontavian Wicks, had a nice touchdown down the sideline. That salvaged a decent fantasy day for him. Tucker Kraft caught a really nice touchdown over the middle, just a bullet through the defense for Jordan Love, and a really nice diving catch for Tucker Kraft. He continues to be viable. Tough day for Jaden Reed. Had a drop on a long pass before the half that would have been, like a 45, 50-yard gain. Just didn't really get it going at any point. And like I mentioned, Green Bay, they scored on their first drive of the second half to retake the lead, and then had a chance to go up 2 scores multiple times. Defense got 4 straight stops. The Packers went 3 and out on 3 straight possessions before finally breaking through late. So it was kind of a defensive battle for the most part in the second half. But the type of game that Green Bay would not have won in previous years. Like no Packers defense in the last 5 or 10 years would have been able to string together stops like that.
It's Jeff Hafley, right?
Jeff Hafley.
The Hafley difference. Look at that. Love to see that. And then also, fun fact, Josh Jacobs' first career touchdown catch, correct?
Is that his first career touchdown catch? I did not know that.
Yes.
Well, there we go. What a great stat.
So like 200 some odd career receptions.
And okay, it is. You're right. I'm confirming. It is his first. And I mean, an awesome play design too. Where at Green Bay, they were, I think on first down, they tried to run it and got stuffed. And then, they lined Josh Jacobs up like kind of in the slot and ran almost like a bubble screen for him, but it ended up being wide open. I mean, Matt LaFleur has been cooking all year.
He has. And, the additional beauty of that being in the icy all white winter warning uniforms made it all the better. So that was just phenomenal stuff there. Anything else on this game before we move on?
No, I mean, I will mention that it was like 76 degrees in Wisconsin yesterday. So not exactly a winter warning per se. I think they probably thought it'd be a little colder when they debuted those uniforms, but really, really love those. I hope that they actually break them out a little more. I think it's just kind of a one-time thing for now. But again, I'll finish by saying huge for Green Bay to get to 5-2 with how competitive their own division is. I mean, again, you still have Minnesota, you still have Detroit twice, you have Chicago twice, you get Seattle later in the year, you get San Francisco on the schedule, you'll have a much healthier version of the Dolphins coming to Green Bay on Thanksgiving. So getting to 5-2 here, giving yourself a little bit of breathing room. I mean, you feel like you got to get to at least 10 wins even to make the playoffs. I don't know if they're going to have a chance at the division. They should. They're only one game back at this point, but really big win, of course, for the Green Bay Packers. They get the Jags in Jacksonville next week, and I'm already jumping on that Packers line. I know it opened last night. It was sitting at 5. I think that line is going to swell, and I think that's going to be a smash spot for Green Bay.
I like that call as well. And last thing from me, Stephon Diggs, very funny quote after the game. He's just, I'm never going to be the bigger person. Like,
yeah, like, all right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. And I do wish I'm going to Wisconsin later this week, as you know, and I wish that the Wisconsin weather was. I wish the forecast from yesterday was going to be the case.
Yeah, it's not going to be too bad. We're going to be in like the 50s and 60s. That's fine for late October.
Yeah, usually Halloween, the line of demarcation up there. Let's go to Indianapolis versus Miami. Not a whole lot to say here. Other than Jonnu Smith going 7 for 7 with the touchdown. It was good to see the Miami running backs get back going a little bit. Devin Achane over 70 yards rushing, and Mostert, the day kind of befouled by the fumble, but had 50 rushing yards in his own right. So the run game was going. That was an encouraging thing to see coming off of the bye. But once again, I mean, there's just nothing that Miami can do passing wise while Tua is out. I think the good news is that there's a chance that Tua is back in the fold this week. But until that's the case, I don't know how you can really start any of these Miami pass catchers.
Yeah, I had that in my notes as well. I mean, Hill and Waddle are they're not startable without Tua. We've seen enough of a sample now, not only last year, but obviously this year too. They combined for 2 catches for 19 yards on 4 targets in this game. And by the way, Tyler Huntley ended up leaving early in the second half. So we saw Tim Boyle coming in to finish this one out for Miami. Dolphins were up 10-0 in this game. They were up 10-3 at the half. Their second half drives, John, punt, fumble, punt, missed field goal, out on downs to end the game. And it was just a really sad kind of out with a whimper final play for Tim Boyle. At the very least, though, it should have had a chance to tie this game in regulation, maybe even win it outright. Alec Ingold's fumble, you mentioned Mostert's, that was a killer, but Ingold fumbled at the Indy 13-yard line on a first down. I mean, again, at the very least, you're getting a field goal on that drive. You probably feel pretty good about punching it in. So the 2 fumbles ended up really sinking Miami here. Indy did not play well. Anthony Richardson was not good. Lost a fumble on a mishandled snap deep in Miami territory. Somehow wasn't able to dive on it despite the ball sitting at his feet for like 3 seconds. 10 of 24 for 129 yards. Did carry 14 times for 56, but just not a good day for Anthony Richardson. Jonnu Smith ended up kind of being the fantasy guy in this game. 7 for 96 and a touchdown on 7 targets for him. We did see Odell Beckham in the mix, played 11 snaps, was targeted twice for the Dolphins. You mentioned Achane, 40 snaps, 11 carries, 0 targets for him. Mostert played 23 snaps, had 5 carries, also targeted 0 times. Didn't see any real running back involvement out of the backfield. Colts receivers with Anthony Richardson, it's kind of back to one or two big plays or nothing, whether it's Michael Pittman or Alec Pierce. Michael Pittman just kind of put up his usual line with Anthony Richardson, 3 catches on 5 targets for 63 yards. No passing touchdowns, of course, for the Colts in this game. Tyler Huntley did throw a touchdown, by the way, to Jonnu Smith. This was as ugly as it looked. I thought the total in this game was like 43.5. That was one of my plays for Bookies Plus this week. I don't know why it was that high. I don't understand it at all. I know if some of those fumbles don't happen, maybe we do get a higher score, but I thought the under 43.5 was like the lock of the week.
Yeah, that was a good call. I don't know where the offense was going to be coming from in this one, especially with the move from Joe Flacco back to Anthony Richardson in the backup situation, of course, in Miami. I did hold my nose and take the Dolphins against the number.
So did I.
When it's 2 bad teams, I'm taking the team that's getting points, and I actually did all right this week. I think 8-5 going into this evening, but
nice.
that one stung. It felt like Indianapolis didn't deserve that cover, no. But I suppose Miami deserved it even less.
Yeah, the Dolphins, maybe they didn't deserve to win this game. They absolutely should have covered. We talked about the fumbles and the missed field goal. This should have been probably a 3-point win for Indy, and I had Miami at 3.5, so I was with you on that. You mentioned, the expectation, I think, is that Tua's back. The line would imply that he's going to be back. Miami is a 3.5-point home favorite over Arizona right now for Week 8. So, I know we talked about Hill and Waddle not being startable, but you obviously feel a lot better throwing them back out if Tua's there. And then one last note for Indy, maybe next week we get Jonathan Taylor back in the mix, but he, of course, did not play this week. Goodson and Sermon, ended up splitting things relatively evenly, but Goodson looked like the better back to me. 14 carries, 51 yards, and a touchdown for him. Trey Sermon, 8 for 36. Sermon did have a 13-yard catch as well, but we know what we're signing up for right now with the Colts offense with Anthony Richardson at the helm.
Yeah, it's a lot of boom or bust, and more often than not at this point, it's mostly just bust.
Yeah, well, and they play at Houston, at Minnesota, and then home for Buffalo their next 3 games. None of those are good fantasy spots.
No, I wouldn't think so. Let's palate cleanse. Let's get to the biggest and best game of the 1 o'clock window, Lions-Vikings. I think that there were a bunch of games for people to circle on this slate. It was a great slate of games, and this one was arguably the best one coming in on paper, and it absolutely delivered. It had everything from the late game lead changes, exciting plays, great performances from both quarterbacks. The stars were out. Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown combined 16 targets, 15 catches, a couple of touchdowns between the two of them. Really impressive stuff as per usual. Aaron Jones looked no worse for wear, which I think was impressive. 14 carries, 93 yards against that run defense. I think that says a lot about where he is and the Vikings' ability to scheme that up and to run block well. Jahmyr Gibbs having the huge day for him. Montgomery got dinged up for a little bit, but was able to return. Also, by David Montgomery standards, made an unbelievable catch out of the backfield. Did you see that?
I did. And you don't really think of David Montgomery as a pass catcher. He also lost a huge fumble. It almost blew the game for Detroit, by the way, after coming back in. And I'm just glad he's healthy, because I have David Montgomery on more teams than just about any other player. And, initially when he left that game with a knee injury, it did not look good. And I think it ended up being more of a bruised knee, like took a hit to the knee as opposed to, kind of moving it the wrong way. So was just glad to see him come back into this game. Huge win, of course, for Detroit. Wild back and forth game. Minnesota jumped out to a 2-score lead early on. Detroit went for just an insane fake punt on its first possession. Basically handed a touchdown to Minnesota right out of the gate. I'm like, it was just such a Dan Campbell thing to do. It's like he decided, like, we are scoring on this drive. I don't care. And it's like you're going for a fake punt at like your own 30-yard line. Just disastrous play. At that point, you're thinking, all right, maybe Minnesota is really for real here, and they're going to run away with this. But the Lions scored touchdowns on 3 straight drives to end the half. They also scored a touchdown on their first drive out of the half. So 4 straight touchdown drives for the Lions to ultimately take control of this game. You mentioned Montgomery leaving with a knee injury, came back, still saw a lot more Jahmyr Gibbs throughout this game. I thought Gibbs was incredible. The touchdown run, that was like a USC Reggie Bush type of juke that he put on a Vikings defender. He's just incredibly fun to watch. But it ended up being a much bigger day for him. Those two combined, Gibbs and Montgomery, for 7 catches for 83 yards. We, of course, saw a Jake Bates field goal to win this game. I didn't love Detroit, like literally kneeling it out before the field goal, like trying to pick up a couple more yards. Like a 41-yard field goal is better than a 44-yard field goal. I know Montgomery had just fumbled and maybe you didn't want to risk that and it worked out for them, but it was kind of strange to me that they didn't try to pick up more yards before that attempt. Overall though, this was one of the most evenly played games that you will ever see. Like total yardage, yards per play, third down conversions, time of possession, penalties, like go look at the stats. Like all those categories were like almost exactly dead even. I mean, this was a really well-played game, a really fun game. And I don't come out of this game feeling dramatically better about Detroit, dramatically worse about Minnesota. The Vikings were going to take a loss at some point, and I think this is a pretty respectable one to take. I mean, Jared Goff was completely dialed in. I thought Brian Flores did a pretty good job making things tough on Goff, but Goff responded, man, 22 of 25, 2 touchdowns, had some just big time throws against one of the best, if not the best defenses in football. Both he and Darnold were sacked 4 times, by the way. But yeah, really evenly played game. 2 teams that I think are absolutely players in the NFC.
Yes. So that preview of more to come, and just furthering the statement of how good the NFC North is, and Goff I think was 15 of 15 to start the game. Yeah. He is now 4th in the MVP odds.
Yeah, and reasonably so, man. I think just being the quarterback on what should be one of the best teams in football buys you a lot, right? I mean, there's a reason that Mahomes, despite his numbers, is still way up there as well. If the Chiefs go like 15-2, it's going to be hard to look away from him. But yeah, Detroit, obviously kind of had some weird games early in the season, but they're now, rolling right now. I think this is still maybe with the exception of Baltimore, the most complete team in the NFL, the team that you kind of trust most on a week-to-week basis. They should have a free win at home against Tennessee next week. When I checked that line, it was at 11.5. So it should be one of the biggest spreads of the season in favor of Detroit. And Minnesota goes to the LA Rams next week, which is an interesting one. That's our Thursday night game this week. So short turnaround for Minnesota going on the road. And obviously we'd expect the Rams to have Cooper Kupp back. Yes.
So that'll be big on that one, on that front. When it comes to that Rams Thursday nighter against the Vikes, but de facto bye week coming up for the Lions. Has to feel good after a couple of big like emotional wins, having blown out Dallas and then gone into Minnesota, burning the boats and getting the victory. Let's go Eagles Giants. The Eagles, I mean, this was one where you look at the board this past week and you see the Eagles -3 and you're like, I feel like I'm getting tricked. Like, why isn't it a lot more than this? How much faith are the books putting into the Giants? Why is it, the Giants have been scrappy occasionally. Like they didn't get blown out by the Bengals, but like how much credit does that really earn them? I mean, I suppose the Eagles, having played sloppily against the Browns last week, might have played into it a little bit. And the Eagles had kind of generally not really hit their stride this year, but they certainly did in Saquon's return.
Yeah, this felt like such an obvious Saquon spot, and that certainly came through. Honestly, should have been a bigger day for Saquon. Jalen Hurts vultured 2 rushing touchdowns at the goal line. We saw a lot of Kenneth Gainwell late in this game. Philly essentially pulled the starters once they put that final touchdown on the board. But you'll take a 17 for 176 in a touchdown game for Saquon. Had 2 really long runs that looked like they might have gone for touchdowns, ended up being chased down. But he was fantastic in this game. It's still just kind of an ugly-ish game for Philly. It was like a few big plays basically won it for them. They were 1 of 13 on third downs, 1 of 13 in a game that they won easily. They were 3 of 3 on fourth downs. We saw A.J. Brown with his customary 41-yard touchdown, just a perfect dime down the sideline from Jalen Hurts. Saquon Barkley, like we mentioned, had a few big runs that really set the Eagles up. But this game started with 7 consecutive punts. The Giants punted on their first 6 drives overall. They only had 10 first downs on the day. It will not surprise you if you watched any of this game that this was the single worst offensive performance of the year by any team in terms of yards per play. The Giants were 3 of 14 on third down, 2.2 yards per play, John. Far and away the lowest of any team this season. The previous low was the Bears in that week 1 disaster victory somehow over Tennessee. But 2.2 yards per play is like egregiously bad. Daniel Jones was under siege from the start, 7 sacks on the day. If you were watching Red Zone, it felt like every time they flashed to this game, either Jones or Hurts were being sacked. Drew Lock ended up coming in. He took a sack as well. Good for him. The Giants finished this game with 43 net passing yards when you factor in all the lost yardage on sacks. Malik Neighbors, 4 for 41 on 8 targets. Wan'Dale Robinson, 6 for 23 on 9 targets. We did see Tyrone Tracy significantly outsnapped Devin Singletary 29-12. He outcarried him 6-5. Obviously, was not a run-heavy script for the Giants. Fantasy-wise, Devontae Smith did absolutely nothing. That's a tough one to swallow. In a game where Philly puts up 4 touchdowns, they dominate the game. But it's kind of emblematic of how clunky this offense was. I mean, Jalen Hurts threw 14 passes. He was 10 of 14 for 114 yards. Devontae Smith finished with 1 catch for -2 yards.
I was going to ask, what was your takeaway from this game plan from Philly? Because it worked, right? I mean, like they ran it 45 times as opposed to only 14 passes, but they ran for 269 yards and 3 touchdowns. So it's like, why not just keep going back to the well? Do you think it's a statement a little bit about their pass protection? Given how lively the pass rush has been from the Giants, maybe like the one thing they could really kind of hang their hat on. So just try to run right at them instead of risk the dropbacks.
Yeah, I think it was a game that Philly clearly said, we don't respect the Giants offense. If we have to win this game 13-3, we're okay with that. And they hit enough big plays on the ground that they were able to put up, significantly more points. But yeah, the Giants pass defense is decent too, right? I mean, we saw them, kind of cool off a Bengals passing offense that had been red hot going into last week. They obviously go and win in Seattle a couple of weeks ago. So I think they saw some advantages on the ground and were able to take advantage of that. But this just ended up being a complete decimation. Again, I just can't believe the 2.2 yards per play. I mean, it felt like that, but my goodness, that is putrid. That'll probably be the lowest number we'll see this season.
Yeah, just really, ghastly stuff. Georgia Bulldogs on the Eagles defense combined for 5 of those sacks. Pretty good between Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter, Kobe Dean.
Yeah. Think of it this way, that the Carolina Panthers lost 40-7 to the Commanders. They had 180 total yards, and they had double the yards per play of the Giants.
Oh boy, Dable's got to just be. Well, he doesn't have any hair to pull out, but if he did, he would be.
Yeah.
Why don't we go to the afternoon slate? We'll tee up the first 2 games and get through them before we get to Chiefs Niners. But okay, we'll start with Raiders Rams. I don't have a ton of notes on this one. This one in a 3-game afternoon slate in which one of them was over in the first quarter. I still couldn't really bring myself to lock in on this Rams-Raiders game.
Raiders got the cover. They probably deserved to, honestly, because I thought the Rams were pretty bad in this game. The Rams offense was terrible throughout this one, but you can get away with that against the Raiders because they did what they always do, which is hang around, commit some horrible turnovers, have a quarterback get hurt, have a chance to tie it, for some reason kick the field goal and tell yourself you're getting the ball back. And then they did get the ball back. It kind of worked out, only to commit one more final devastating turnover, an interception by Gardner Minshew. But yeah, Aiden O'Connell left this game fairly early. And we saw Minshew for the bulk of it. He came in and went 15 of 34, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Rams defense showed up, no question about that. But I thought offensively, they really couldn't do a whole lot. Matthew Stafford was 14 of 23 for 154 yards and a pick that came on a tip ball. No Jacoby Myers for the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously, Devontae Adams now plays for the Jets. That left us with DJ Turner and Trey Tucker, both playing 75 snaps in this game. Both ran 45 routes. Both had 7 targets. Both had 1 carry. Not a whole lot of action right now, fantasy-wise, in that Raiders wide receiving core. Brock Bowers, though, man, I mean, what else could you say? 66 snaps, 39 routes, 13 targets for him. Caught 10 of those for 93 yards. Sneakily well on pace to break Puka Nacua's rookie receptions record.
Yeah, that Brock Bowers guy, not bad. And especially with Devontae Adams being out of the picture now fully, I mean, I don't know who the argument is to be tight end 1 the rest of the season.
I mean, I think it's Bowers. I think if you were drafting right now, knowing what we know, not banking any production from previous weeks, I think it's Brock Bowers or George Kittle, right? I mean, those 2 are number 1 and 2 in fantasy points by a mile so far this season. Kittle's been better on a per game basis. He's averaging about 2 more fantasy points than Bowers. So I think there's an argument for him. That's about it. There's kind of that second tier of guys who've emerged like Tucker Kraft. I still like Trey McBride, who obviously hasn't played yet this week. And, Kyle Pitts is tight end 6 on the year. He's put up double-digit fantasy points now in 3 straight weeks. But yeah, it's Bowers and Kittle and everybody else.
And then, one kind of other interesting box score takeaway from the Raiders side of it is they actually were able to run the ball a little bit.
Yeah.
They couldn't throw for anything, obviously, with Minshew, averaging 4.5 yards per pass attempt. But I didn't think that we would see the Raiders get to 100 rushing yards anytime soon. And, Alexander Mattison got them almost all the way there with 23 rushes for 92.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an efficient day by any means. I think he had one carry go for more than 10 yards. So, you like the 92 yards, I guess, but, you don't love that it took him 23 carries to get there. But yeah, that was kind of their way to hang in this game. Zamir White was back and active, by the way, only played 11 snaps. So they went heavy Alexander Mattison. He played 55 of 79 total snaps. Saw a little bit of Amir Abdullah as well. Heavy day for Kyren Williams, volume-wise. Similarly inefficient, 21 for 76, but did give you 2 touchdowns. I think that's now 9 games in a row, dating back to last year, that he has at least 1 touchdown. They flashed that graphic during the game, and LaDainian Tomlinson holds the record, by the way, 18 consecutive games with a touchdown. That's borderline untouchable. We'll see how far Kyren could push this, but 18 games in a row is just ridiculous. The Rams, by the way, this is the last thing I'll say because there's just not a whole lot of takeaways here, but all of their points came off of turnovers. They scored a touchdown off of a pick. They had a fumble return for a touchdown, and their third touchdown also came after an interception for the Raiders.
I was posed with a difficult fantasy decision. I had to start one of either Matthew Stafford or CJ Stroud. I chose Stafford based on the matchup. I chose correctly. I got 7.5 points, and CJ Stroud with like 6.2. So grinding the edges at quarterback, that's exactly what you want. Let's hit Commanders-Panthers. Commanders, I mean, I famously, maybe not famously, but I did say on the betting pod that I like the Panthers against the number this week. I want to be transparent for the audience, but it happened. And folks, I was wrong. 40-7. This one was never in question. I think when I sat down to dig into the late games, I just see Dante Fowler running the other way with the ball for a touchdown. And I'm like, oh, that seems like that's not going to help the Panthers cover at all. And, things progressed from there. And even without Jaden Daniels being out there for most of this game, Daniels left with that rib injury after just attempting 2 passes and running 3 times effectively on those 3 runs, 50 yards total, including that 46-yarder from him. But Mariota just kind of picked up where Daniels left off. It seems like this is a system that Kingsbury has shown a lot of growth. I think that this is a Washington offense that, I think was garnering a fair amount of respect, like a reasonable skepticism coming into the season. It's like, oh, Cliff, like, are you kidding me? But no, he's a different man now. And I think you got to respect this Washington offense to where it can be plug and play for Mariota. And that's not to take away from anything that Daniels has done thus far. But I think there's also something to be said as far as roster construction is concerned, where if you're looking for your backup quarterback, it has to be someone that can operate the offense the same way that your starter can. Maybe not to the same level of effectiveness, but you don't want to completely go away from the DNA of your offense. So, that's just, tip of the hat to Washington for, making sure that, that you can keep the line moving.
Yeah, and tip of the cap to Mariota for playing one of the better games that we've seen from him in recent years. Washington's ability to not miss a beat whatsoever after Jaden Daniels went down was really impressive. I know it's the Panthers, but still, I mean, this was a thorough beatdown. Like, there was really no drop off from Daniels to Mariota. Daniels only played the first offensive series of the game. It's not like he played, through the third quarter or anything, and Mariota just had to come in for the save. He basically played this entire game, and Washington still dominated at the level that you'd expect with Jaden Daniels. We saw a Bryce Young appearance at the end of this game. That's how bad things got for Carolina. He finished 2 of 2 for -4 yards, so he's still got it, still cooking as the backup. Brian Robinson was back. Ended up splitting snaps with Austin Eckler. Again, this game was over early on, so kind of tough to take a whole lot away with such a weird game script. But I thought Washington kept the pedal down, for most of this game. They were up 27-0 at the half, still kept pouring it on in the third quarter. Terry McLaurin, despite Jaden Daniels going down, still had a decent day, 6 for 98, caught all 6 of his targets, did not find the end zone. The 2 receiving touchdowns went to 2 tight ends, Zach Ertz and Ben Sinnott put one in later in the game as well. Just not a whole lot to say here. I mean, Chuba Hubbard, 17 for 52 and a touchdown. I think you'll take that given the situation. This game actually got so out of hand that Carolina was just like playing a normal script in the second half. It wasn't like pass every single time because they knew the game was over. And then the last fantasy note I'll mention is I guess we just got to keep an eye on the wide receiver 2 battle for the Commanders because this is such an effective offense, such an efficient, high scoring offense. Like obviously Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver 1 by a mile. But we saw Noah Brown play 42 snaps, was only targeted once, unfortunately, on those 42 snaps, but he was functionally the wide receiver 2, although Olamide Zaccheaus ended up with 6 targets of his own. So Brown, Zaccheaus, Luke McCaffrey, De'Ami Brown, kind of monitoring that week to week as far as the usage goes.
That feels like a team that's ripe to upgrade at its wide receiver 2 spot. I mean, they get rid of Jahan Dotson late in the offseason. And, I think Noah Brown is an NFL player, but like he's more of like a wide receiver 4 type, wide receiver 3 maybe. De'Ami Brown has just not really progressed the way that people would have hoped. And McCaffrey, just a rookie, so you don't want to be overly reliant on him. So I wouldn't be surprised if they kick the tires on a veteran receiver that is on the way out of their current team. All right, crown jewel of the afternoon, Niners, Chiefs. Chiefs pretty much dominated this one despite it being kind of an ugly performance from the offense. More injuries for San Francisco, though. I mean, how snake bit can one team be at this point?
Yeah, they're pushing the limits of snake bittenness. I don't know if we have an advanced metric for that, but they're up there, man. And that's, I think that's kind of the big thing coming out of this game is like, do we have to lower our ceiling for this Niners team, knowing what we know on the injury front? And you're referring, of course, to Brandon Ayuk, who left this game with a knee injury. We got the dreaded, feared to be a torn ACL, which when that comes out, it's almost always a torn ACL. So I think we can remove him from the mix. Deebo Samuel ended up playing in this game, played like a handful of snaps, and then was unable to keep going. He was dealing with an illness that obviously hurt the Niners. Juwan Jennings is banged up as well. And obviously they're without Christian McCaffrey indefinitely. This was a predictably weird and ugly game. I thought you kind of knew, like with the way the Chiefs are winning games this year, it was not going to be a shootout by any means. Mahomes finished 16 of 27 for 154 yards and 2 picks. Did have a rushing touchdown. I thought was really good with his legs throughout this game. One of the interceptions was batted at the line. The other one, was a fine throw. Xavier Worthy just tripped and fell down, led to an easy interception for the Niners. But luckily, Brock Purdy was no better. 17 of 31, 212 yards, 3 picks, no touchdowns. Did have 2 short rushing touchdowns as well. Jordan Mason, just 58 yards on 14 carries. Kareem Hunt ended up being the fantasy star in this game, 22 carries for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. But I don't know where the Niners go from here. I mean, obviously you expect Debo should be healthy by next week, and that's big. But, Ricky Pearsall, he's going to play a ton. We saw him in this game. Chris Conley, Ronnie Bell, Jacob Cowing. We're going to see more Juwan Jennings, certainly. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think he's long been one of the best wide receiver 3s in the NFL. But this could be another team where if they, if they feel like things are slipping away, maybe they're the Christian Kirk or the DeAndre Hopkins bidder. Not that necessarily changes things too much for the Niners, but they're 3-4, man. 3-4 with losses to the Cardinals, Vikings, Rams, and Chiefs. They are home for the Cowboys next week. And then they go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after that. Then it's Seattle, Green Bay, Buffalo, Chicago. So not a lot of free wins on the schedule remaining for the Niners.
Yeah, the disappointment bowl between them and the Cowboys is going to be all time next week. But yeah, it feels like the Niners, if they make a move to like mortgage some draft capital to get a guy, like it feels like they're chasing already. Like they've done a pretty good job of weathering the storm, all things considered. I mean, you're without McCaffrey, for the first half of the season, and you're still able to run the ball really effectively with Jordan Mason and Isaac Guerrero. You are without Brandon Ayuk playing at full efficiency for a lot of this, but you're still able to weather it. But yeah, the losses are starting to stack up. And I think, for the first time I saw on Twitter a doubt from, I think someone from the Bay Area, like, does this team even make the playoffs? Their playoff odds right now are minus 140 at the DraftKings Sportsbook. So actually the Falcons are like more favored to make the playoffs at minus 145.
Yeah, and that makes sense, I think. Although the division's, by no means out of reach for the Niners. They have the tie break over Seattle as of right now, despite being 2 games back. I think they got to go 7-3 the rest of the way. So look through the schedule and find where the 7 wins come. If you think that happens, then they can do it. But again, you look at some of the opponents here. I mean, they got to play the Lions late in the year. They're going to play a much healthier version of the Dolphins in December. You'll play a much healthier version of the Rams in their second meeting in about a month and a half. The Bears are not a free win, going to Buffalo, to Green Bay, to Tampa Bay. Those are all kind of 50-50 games, but going on the road for all those is really difficult. I think there's really a path here for them to miss the playoffs. That's totally realistic.
I think so too. I mean, it's all stacking up. I was worried about them coming into this year anyway. Relative to expectations, like they opened as the favorites to win the Super Bowl, and it's like after losing the Super Bowl that way last year, losing as much as they did on the defensive side, you're going to have to add more on to Brock Purdy's plate. I thought last year was going to have to be their year, and it wasn't. As far as specking for, Ayuk replacements on the waiver wire this week, I am interested in Jacob Cowing, although I will say that given the fact that the Niners took Ricky Pearsall in the first round, he probably gets a bit of the in-house advantage as far as a path to playing time. So that's how I'd handicap it, but I think both are worth specking on.
Yeah, Cowing had a long catch late in the game, just a totally blown coverage by the Chiefs. But he only played 12 snaps, was targeted 3 times on those 12, which is nice. But Pearsall played 48 snaps. He led all Niners receivers in snaps. Chris Conley played 44, and then Ronnie Bell played 24. So if you're just kind of reading between the lines on the usage so far, Pearsall and Conley would be the 2.
Yeah, and I love Chris Conley. Conley's a football player, but he's probably not going to, even if he plays a lot of snaps, I don't think that he's someone that is going to draw a lot of targets. On the other side, as far as the Chiefs are concerned being the word, Kelsey, four catches on 5 targets, pretty good. 17 yards, a long catch of 7 yards.
I told you, man, it was a weird game. It was a weird game. I mean, Mahomes threw for 154 yards, so there's just not going to be a whole lot of production there. Noah Gray and Samaje Perine were the 2 leading receivers for the Chiefs, and that's just kind of how it's going to go. The Chiefs find a new, bizarre way to win a game every single week, and they're 6-0. So I'm not going to fault them for it, but it somehow gets uglier and yet more effective at the same time. They go to the Raiders, by the way, next week, so that should be a very winnable game. Should be able to push that, you would think, to 7-0. And then Tampa Bay, Denver, Buffalo, Carolina, the Raiders again after that. I mean, I remember, I think it was Bill Barnwell said in the offseason, he was doing a ultra bold predictions, and he said Kansas City would go 16-1 in the regular season. And I was like, yeah, okay, man, sounds good. I don't know. I mean, they're beating everybody, man. They're finding ways to just grind out these games. It has not been pretty whatsoever. I don't think they go 16-1. I think they do get tripped up a few times here, but again, a lot of winnable games the rest of the way. I mean, the schedule is not difficult the rest of the way for Kansas City.
All right, no guts, no glory. The Chiefs are giving 10 against the Raiders.
Oh,
what do you think?
Boy. I'll probably take the Chiefs. I don't know. I'll take the Chiefs. It's if you can, I don't know, if you can beat the Niners by 10, you should be able to beat the Raiders by 10. It worries me that Gardner Minshew is out there because I think he's slightly better than O'Connell. He also threw 3 picks this week against a terrible defense. And I think the Chiefs defense might be top 3 in the league. So yeah, not going to love any big number like that, but I would lean KC as of now. Hopefully it gets down to 9.5.
All right, it is 9.5 at some shops.
Jump on it.
So bang.
Right. Let's talk Jets Steelers and get the heck out of here.
All right, let's do it. So the Jets got off to a decent start here, but they were shut out in the second half. Breece Hall salvaged his day through the air once again. Was mostly ineffective on the ground. Did have the rushing touchdown, but I think around 3 yards per carry. But the big takeaway, other than, and we can get into the incoming train wreck that is the Jets at this stage and will be for the remainder of the season, in my opinion. The Steelers, changed horses midstream, and the offense actually looked pretty good. It was a move that ended up looking good. Russ Wilson throws for 264 and a couple of touchdowns. George Pickens looks good. I was commenting to some friends during the game last night that, for all the warts that Pickens may have, his good is really, really good. Right. I mean, so that was huge. Najee Harris runs for 100 yards. It just looked like a more NFL offense, and it was effective against a Jets defense that has shockingly regressed this year.
The Jets have a lot of issues. I don't think anybody watched the Jets the first 6 games of the year and said, "Oh, Devontae Adams, that's what they need. That'll fill their biggest hole." But the defense, that's been the biggest surprise to me. Like, I'm not shocked that the offense is struggling. Aaron Rodgers is not the same guy. His last few offenses struggled in Green Bay. This actually feels a lot like the Packers, his final year there, where everything looks difficult. You know, it just feels like the entire game is a series of like 3rd and 6s. And it's like, how many 3rd and 6s can you pick up? How many times are you just launching the ball out of bounds on 3rd and 6 instead of trying to find something easier? But the defense was just horrendous in this game. The defense was terrible last week against Buffalo too. I mean, I will say the Steelers had a lot of things go their way, you know, in terms of like 50-50 balls. And when it's George Pickens, maybe it's more like an 80-20 ball. But the Jets had opportunities to either create turnovers or get Pittsburgh off the field. And, you know, the ball skills for these cornerbacks is just terrible. Like Pickens was mossing guys. Pat Freiermuth had a really nice catch. You know, Pickens had another one where it was, I thought, really well defended, but he just maintained focus longer and was able to basically rip it away, kind of tip it to himself for a big gain down the sidelines. The Jets were the team that was able to rip off big plays early in the game, and that totally dried up. I was on the Jets last night. It was one of my favorite picks of the week. I look like an idiot now. Second week in a row I've taken the Jets. But this went to script early on. Like Russell Wilson was getting booed on the 3rd series of the game. You know, the Steelers got a field goal on their first drive and then went 3 and out on 3 straight drives. And Russ looked terrible on those drives. And I'm like, all right, this is why I like the Jets. It wasn't even that I went on New York. It was more of a fade of Russell Wilson. But Wilson was nails, you know, final 3 quarters of the game. He was really good. You know, Mike Tomlin rightfully took his victory lap on that in the post-game presser. And you saw the appeal of Russell Wilson as far as the creation of deep balls, right? I mean, he had a couple plays that they highlighted on the broadcast where it's like, oh yeah, Justin Fields probably would have taken off for a 25-yard run there. And instead it's a sack or an incompletion for Russell Wilson. But getting George Pickens involved like that, like Justin Fields just isn't capable of some of those throws that Russell Wilson made. But this was more about the Jets defense, I think, just looking paltry yet again, giving up 37 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And really I thought the big point that changed this game, you know, New York was up, I think it was 15 to 6 at that time. So you have a 9-point lead and you're on the move. You're around midfield. You're driving for, you know, hopefully at least a field goal, if not a touchdown before half. Rodgers throws a pick. Pittsburgh immediately turns that into a touchdown. And it felt like that completely swung all the momentum going into the half, with the Steelers then getting the ball out of halftime.
Yep. And then you also have a blocked field goal in there, you know, anytime that
was huge too, because that would have cut it to a 1-score game. And that felt like the official, like, all right, this isn't happening.
Yep. So, I mean, the Steelers, you know, I don't know how they've cobbled it together this way, but they just they're like football MacGyver. Like they're just going to like use popsicle sticks and glue and just find a way to win in interesting ways every week. And I think the Jets on the other side are like the MacGyver of losing. Like they will find new and interesting ways to beat themselves every single week. And I go on this radio show to talk fantasy every Tuesday in Ruston, Louisiana. So shout out to anyone that listens to that here as well. But they asked me about the Davante Adams trade last week. And I basically compared it to like a struggling couple that's just like, all right, a baby's going to fix all of our problems. Like it. Yeah. No, Davante Adams going three out of 9 targets for 30 yards. He's not fixing the Jets.
Watching the Jets reminds me of watching the Lakers these last couple of years, where you're like, all right, we know the names, you know, LeBron James, he's still really good. Anthony Davis, he's still really good. But you watch them against really good teams and you're like, there's a gap here, you know, when they play the Nuggets or the Timberwolves or the Celtics or whoever it is. And I just get that same vibe with the Jets, man. Again, everything looks difficult for this offense. Like it feels like every time they would pick up a first down, the next play is Breece Hall 2-yard loss hit in the backfield. And then, you know, they run it again and he picks up 3 yards and it's 3rd and 9 and Rodgers throws short of the sticks and the drive's over. Like they have no ability to really generate big plays. The big plays that they had in this game were just off of missed tackles by Pittsburgh. You know, there's just nothing really confident down the field. It feels like most teams, even like bad teams in the NFL, a couple times a game, they'll just be a receiver like streaking wide open down the field. And you're like, how did that happen? Like that never happens for the Jets. Like even the big plays that they hit, you know, a lot of things have to go their way or it's like the defense messing up. Like they just have no ability to instill confidence, drive to drive. And, you know, Davante Adams was involved early in this game, was just basically a no-show in the second half. You know, ended up playing basically the same number of snaps as Garrett Wilson. But like you said, 3 for 30 on 9 targets, just an ugly game for him. Jets are officially spiraling, man. I mean, they're 2-5. They're 2-5. They've lost 4 in a row straight up. They do get the New England Patriots next week. That is a winnable game. They have a few more winnable games coming up, but I don't see this team making the playoffs right now. I don't really see them flipping that switch. Like we've seen even the games that they've won, they haven't looked that good. Really, like the Patriots game's the only exception.
Yeah, their 2 wins are what? that and the Titans. Is that correct? So
yeah, those are the two. Yeah,
that's abysmal. I mean, it's getting late early there for the Jets. I don't see any fixes. And, to your point about like their inability to even generate one open play, like it in the same game, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are not famous for their like downfield acumen this season, like even Calvin Austin gets wide open for
right.
a big
That's
gainer. Like where's Xavier Gibson doing that? Come on now. But regardless, Jets in big trouble. But I am very much looking forward to the Monday Night Football doubleheader that we're treated to this evening. We got the Ravens, Bucks, and of course the Chargers and the Cardinals. So a couple of Harbaughs in both of the evening time slots tonight. So looking forward to that. But Nick, really enjoyed breaking down Week 7 with you. Jeff will be back next week, I assume. So this is only one double feature of me this week because we will be back in action, of course, for the betting pod later on. But big thanks to our sponsors over at Underdog, over at Circa, over at DK Pick 6, and our podcast hosting network, the Blue Wire Network. For Nick Whalen, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.